So let's take a look at how to customize the ZBrush interface. ZBrush is extremely customizable. You can move around user interface elements at will pretty much, and then save any type of custom interface that you prefer and have that load every time ZBrush starts. Now, first off, I'd like to point out at the top of the screen, we have these abilities to load different user interface colors and the ability to load different user interface layouts. So you can actually click through these and scroll through a variety of different presets and find one that you might prefer to use. There you go. See, it changes colors and changes layout. Now, if you want to get back to the original, go to your preferences, go to config, and go to restore standard UI, and that brings you back to your standard user interface. All your interface customization is going to happen under the preferences menu. So if we tear that off and dock it on the side of the screen, here you can see our different options here. The first button here is to initialize ZBrush. Now, initialize ZBrush basically is a way of restarting ZBrush without having to close the program. It will close your ZTool project and everything and just reset ZBrush. Next down, we have config. Now, this allows you to restore the custom UI or restore the standard UI. And you can store your config here. The hotkey for that is Control-Shift-I. So when we make our configuration changes, we'll store it here. You can also load a configuration file if you have one saved on disk, and you can save your configuration to backup elsewhere. Now, we have the ability to enable customize here. We're going to come back to this menu. If we come down here to iColors, this is interface colors. This allows you to change the colors of all the different interface items. You can change subpalette colors, subpalette 2 colors. See, if we click these, we can change these settings. It's picking up that color from the color swatch here. So if I were to sample that color again, I can reset those. If I sample, click from here and drag over and sample this color, I can reset that. We can change the opacity of our pop-ups here. We can turn this down to make them less opaque, turn it up to make it more opaque. We can change the frame opacity, subpalette opacity, etc. So if you go through these and experiment with them, you can see that there's an almost limitless amount of customization options available for the coloration and opacity of your menu items. Now, we also have the ability here to go to Custom UI, and here we can create our custom menus. So we're going to do that in just a minute. First off, I just want to show you how to actually move things around. If we go to the interface, now this is a little bit hidden. Custom UI is here. Interface colors is here, but under interface, we have another UI menu. Now, this is really handy. We can change the size of our buttons. We can turn on and off wide buttons. Now, if you're using, like, for example, I'm using Cintiq 16 Pro, and what I find is sometimes the ZBrush interface doesn't quite fit on my screen. It's too big. So you can change your button size and you can turn off wide buttons, and that will actually let you get a smaller interface so it fits nicer on your screen. If you've ever experienced a situation where maybe the solo and expose buttons are off screen, this is where you can go to change that. If you look through here, there's a variety of other options that you can change. You can show dynamic subdivisions in icons. If you turn that on, it will show you the dynamic subdivision levels in the subtool icon. You can center, the slider you can snap to the center. Right now it's set to 10. So as you move, it snaps to the center. If you raise that, your slider will have more of a tendency to snap towards the center value, or less if you turn it down. So again, these are all just various ways of customizing the granular elements of the interface. We're not going to go into every single one of these because there's just too much to talk about, and they're pretty self-explanatory. If you mouse over any of them and hold down the control key, you will get a tooltip that says what they do, and most of them it's pretty clear from their naming. What we're most interested in here is adjusting the actual interface itself. So we'll go back to config, and we'll turn on Enable Customize. Now, you'll see you get this sort of empty spot at the top of the screen, and that is a visual cue that lets you know you're in interface customization mode. So let's say, for example, I want to move some interface items around. Let's say I want to go to the stroke menu, and I have this replay last button. Now we set a hotkey for this, but let's say I want this to be a button that's available in the interface. Now, if interface customization is not turned on, if I control Alt click, it's not going to do this. With it turned on, I can click and drag this button, and then I can mouse over the interface, and anywhere where I can dock this is going to light up. You see I can dock this button just about anywhere. So I'm going to put it right here. Now you see I've got a button in my interface for replay last. If I go to stroke and open up, let's say, lazy mouse, I'll bring my lazy mouse button, Control, Alt, click and drag. I can put my lazy mouse button there. Now you see it snapped just a little bit below, so I can drag it up just a tiny bit. There you go, and it will snap to the same level as this one. Let's say I've changed my mind and I don't want it there. I will Control, Alt, click and drag, and just drop that in the document window, and it gets rid of it. Now these are just clones of the interface items. Remember from our interface introduction, the chapter where we go through the entire interface, these items are still here in the main menu. We've just cloned them out here. So if I mouse over this, you see it lights up in the interface where it's been cloned. Now, the same thing is possible with sliders as well. So let's say, for example, I want to make a copy of a slider and bring it down to the bottom of the screen. Now, watch this. If I take the Z intensity slider and drag it down here, it disappears because this is not the original. I'm moving my copy around if I move this. I need to go to the original slider. So if I'm mousing over this and I drag it away, it will disappear. So what I need to do is I need to go to the draw menu, Z intensity, get my original slider, Control Shift, click and drag this, and then I can drop a copy of it here. Now that stays there and it stays there. Now, if I ever need to know where something is in the interface, let's say, for example, I want to put the Sculptris Pro button somewhere, or let's say I find something like the turntable button or elsewhere in the interface. I'll tell you what, let's find something in the interface here. Let's say I want to move the lock camera button. So if I drag it out of here, it's going to disappear. So I need to find the original. So hold down the Control key while you're moused over it, and you see the button path there tells you where it is. It's under Draw, Lock Camera. So that means I go to the Draw menu, and here I find the Lock Camera button there. So this tooltip will tell you where in the interface to find any particular item. Now, let's do a few more. I will go to Z Plugin. I've got a few favorite Z plugins here. For example, Transpose Master is one that I really like to use. Oops. So I'll grab T-Pose Mesh, Control Alt, click and drag, and I can drop that up here. And I will do T-Pose Sub-T, drop that here. And then I can arrange these by scooching them around just by holding down Control and Alt. Perhaps I want to change, perhaps I want to add something else maybe from the tool menu. Maybe I want to go to Tool, Geometry, and I'll take my, my subdivisions here. So let's grab our subdivision slider and put that here. So now I can step up my subdivisions and down. This particular Z tool doesn't have any subdivisions. It's a Dynameshed model. So if I add a subdivision, here you can see I've got the ability to move between my subdivision levels right here. So when I'm finished customizing, go back to your Preferences, Config menu, turn off Enable Customize. Now that blank spot disappears. It's a visual cue to let you know that you are no longer in interface customization mode. Now, this is not saved. So now if I want to restart ZBrush and have this configuration restored, I need to click Store Config, and this will store it as my default configuration. So the next time I start ZBrush, it will come up as my default configuration. If I want to restore my standard UI, simply click Restore Standard UI, and that will reset the user interface to the standard one, getting rid of all those customizations. So let's take a look now at how we can create a custom menu. I am a big fan of floating menus like this one here that's invoked with the spacebar. And there's a menu that I create because I like to adjust my lighting as I'm sculpting, but I find it a little bit tricky to come up here and constantly tinker with the lighting in the top menu. So let's look at how we can create our own custom light menu and then link that to a hotkey. So let's go back to our preferences menu. I'll go to Preferences, and we'll tear this off and dock it on the side of the screen. We'll go to Config, and we'll turn on Enable Customize. Then I'll go to Custom UI. Now you can see I can create a new menu. This was all grayed out earlier when we looked at this menu because we were not in Enable Customize mode. So I'm going to create a new menu, and I like to name my menus with an MM prefix. It's just from Matty Monster, which is my website, by the way, mattymonster.com. You can find lots of tutorials and blog posts and things of interest there. So I call this MM_lights. Now, if you look at the top of the screen, I have a new menu. It automatically alphabetizes itself. That's Matty Monster Lights. Let's tear that off and dock it here. Right now it's empty, so I want to put some things in here. So I'm going to open the light menu. The first thing I want to do is I want to click and drag the light sphere and drop it in there. So there's my light sphere, and this allows me to move my selected light around. Now there is a plugin under Z Plugin Miscellaneous Utilities called Interactive Light right here. Now you can hotkey this, and I used to always have the hotkey for this, but I found sometimes it would freeze my interface. So it's still quite handy. Anytime you press that hotkey, you move your mouse around and it moves the light around, and then you just have to click or press the escape button to get out of it. I've recently replaced that with this pop-up menu because it gives me a little bit more control, and it's pretty much the same. So we've got our sphere, our lighting sphere, but now we need the actual lights themselves. So I'll go to the light menu here, and I will Control-Alt, click and drag the key or the first light here. And I'll Control-Alt, click and drag the second light here. Now, when I'm sculpting, I typically only use two lights. I'll have a key light, and then I'll turn on the secondary light. Usually I'll bring it up to about here, and then what I need to do is I need to turn up the intensity of it. And then if I click on that orange dot, it will put it behind the model, so I can now get a rim light. I also like to change the color on that sometimes. Sometimes I like to add just a very, very light, cool hue to it. Very, very desaturated, cool hue. Something like that. So what you can see here is I need to bring the intensity slider and the color swatch over. So I will bring the intensity slider over. Place that here. And I will bring the color swatch over. Now that intensity slider isn't going to fit in that space which is allotted to it, as you can see. So it automatically drops it down here. So coming back to the light menu, we'll see if there's anything else that we might want to include. The distance slider can be nice. If I turn down the distance slider, it changes the distance of the lights to the object. It's sort of a global setting. Probably not something that I use often enough to justify placing it there. Perhaps it's worthwhile just to put one more light in there, just to fill out the menu a little bit. So let's put this one here, and it automatically offsets that color swatch. Now I can bring this color swatch and drop it down here and put it next to that slider, or I can move the slider over here. Let's see if it's going to let me do that. Let's get rid of the slider, and let's bring the color swatch down here. We might have to use a divider for this. Let's try this one more time. Let's move this in that place. Move this in this place. Oh, it's going to give me some troubles here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of these dividers. So here, these are little clear dividers. If I grab this and place it here, that's a placeholder. So that keeps anything from taking up that place as I'm trying to move interface items around. So I can then bring the color swatch down here and I can get a blank spot there. It's orange while we're in customization mode, but once we get rid of the customization mode, you'll see that it actually will become clear, like a dividing space. So here we have a divider there, and I will go back to my light menu and we'll grab that intensity slider and drop it under here. Now watch what happens when I turn off Enable Customize. Those dividers go away, but it keeps that negative space occupied. Now, if I turn back on Enable Customize, I placed this placeholder there so I could get the slider and the swatches where I wanted them. Now, if I drag this out, that slider will drop back up in the space that I wanted it to occupy. So if you ever run into a problem placing something that should fit, sometimes those placeholders can help you get things to snap into place, and then you can remove them. So one last thing that I want to mention is if you want to rename your menu item, while you're in Enable Customize, Control-Alt-Click on the menu name and you can type something else in there. I'm pretty happy with mm_lights, so we'll just hit Enter and keep that. So now we'll turn off Enable Customize and we will save our configuration. So we'll do that by pressing Control-Shift-I, and that will bring up a configuration file pop-up menu here. And it just says that it's been saved, so every time I load ZBrush now, it will load with this configuration, including this custom menu. So let's go ahead and close out of the sidebar menus here. Now, I want to create a hotkey for this menu because coming up here to the Lights menu is not really any better than having to go to the Light menu. So what I'll do is, and I am not in interface customization mode right now, if I Control-Alt-Click, tear this off to the side menu here. Let me close these others so it's the only menu that we have open. There we go, Lights. If I Control-Alt-Click on the docked menu, it needs to be docked for this to work. Remember that this allows me to set a hotkey. So if you have seen the hotkeys video yet, the chapter that precedes, it's not immediately before this, but it is earlier in the chapter listing, the hotkeys video goes in depth on how to set hotkeys. So it's asking me for a custom hotkey. I use Control-L. So hotkey note, the same hotkey is already assigned to this interface item. Well, that's because I already had this menu set up. So you would get a successful hotkey assignment here. So I can close this out now. Close this out. I'll go to Preferences, Hotkeys, Store. And it asks me if I want to update my hotkeys file, say OK. Now, as I'm working, wherever I am on screen, I press Control-L and it brings up my light menu. So I can change my light intensity, I can turn my rim light on and off, I can change my color, and I can even turn on this extra light if I want to use that as well. But generally what I like to do is just be able to move my light as I'm working. So I can be zoomed in, I could be working on the face here, and I'll just press Control-L. And I'll do this quite often. I think there's a lot of value, and it's actually invaluable to move your lights around while you're sculpting. Because sculpture is about form, and form manipulates light and shadow, so you have to move your lights to see things accurately. And then I just mouse away, and it goes away. And I find that this is a lot more stable than using the Z plugin Miscellaneous Utilities Interactive Light. I don't have as many issues with it locking my interface. So any type of custom menu that you want to make, you can make using these tools. So if I were to go back to Preferences and turn on Custom UI again, or excuse me, turn on Enable Customize under Config, Enable Customize, and if I tore off that Lights button, I could, let's go back to Preferences and tear this off as well. And I will close Lights and then I'll dock it again so it's sitting on top. If I go to Custom UI, I can create a custom subpalette. Watch this. If I Control-Alt, click and drag, and then dock this up here, I now have a subpalette. See that? Control-Shift, click and drag. I can change the placement here. Let's put that down here. And let's pull it down a little bit more. Let's grab this, bring this up here. Doop. Bring this up here. So sometimes you kind of have to sort of squiggle them around a little bit. That just placed the intensity slider inside there. So I'll have to drag that out as best I can. So you see it's getting stuck. So I'm just going to use the divider again. I'm going to place the divider here. And the menu keeps eating these things. So I'm going to erase them. Let's Control-Alt-Click and drag this out. So Control-Alt-Click on the name. We're going to call this subpalette for now. And this can be a little tricky to move around. So let's just empty it out. There you go. It has to be empty before it's going to let me get rid of it. There we go. So if you have something in a subpalette, it's not going to let you get rid of it. So let's go ahead and go back to our light menu. And let's grab that intensity slider again and place it here. And then we'll grab that custom subpalette. Actually, to make our lives easier, let's put a divider in here first so the subpalette doesn't start eating everything we drag in there. So we'll grab our custom subpalette. And let's drag that divider above it. So let's name this. So under our lights, we're just going to put an underscore subpalette. I don't have this in my actual menu that I use, but I just want to show you how you can utilize this. So let's say I want to put some brush related things in here. Maybe I will go to the draw menu, and maybe I want to bring my draw size, drop this into the subpalette, go to draw and grab my focal shift, drop that into the subpalette. There we go. Let's bring that up there. Perfect. My intensity slider is now outside of that subpalette. Inside the subpalette, I have focal shift, draw size, and maybe we'll put in RGB and Z-add. Oops, I've just dragged those out of the interface. You got to be careful not to get carried away and end up doing that. Remember that this particular item is under draw. So we go to draw and we grab RGB and go to draw, grab Z-add, go to draw, grab Z-sub. So there we go. Now I'll turn off Enable Customize. And now if I go to Control L, I have my custom subpalette. If I click that, I can open and collapse that. Now, I'm a big fan of keeping my pop-up windows pretty light. I typically wouldn't use something like this in a pop-up window, and the whole purpose of my Lights menu is to have a contextual pop-up window. So if I want to get rid of that, I go to Config and go to Enable Customize, and I just take my subpalette. Now remember, watch this. If I Control-Alt-click on it, it's going to ask me to rename it. The reason is because it's not empty. We have to empty it out first, just by clicking and dragging and dropping these buttons out into the interface. Now that it's empty, I can get rid of the subpalette. Turn off Enable Customize, and there we go. Control L brings up that menu. So hopefully this shows you new ways you can think about the ZBrush interface and new ways that you can customize it and make it your own. I'm a big believer in learning the hotkeys, and I'm a big believer in learning the standard interface because the standard interface is not that hard. Again, if you've watched the interface video, we demystify it. There's not a lot going on. Everything does make sense if you understand the logic behind it. And if you understand that most of what you see on screen is cloned out of the main menus anyway. So the ZBrush interface is not as big as people think, and it's nowhere near as complex as people think. And it does have a logic, and it's the way it's put together. So I am a big believer in getting to know the default interface, but I also think customization, especially in like a pipeline situation or production situation, being able to work quickly and efficiently is so important. So finding these sorts of custom menus that you can put together for yourself for those things that you use the most often is hugely beneficial. Again, you know, just set them up on a hotkey and they will come up wherever you are. So I hope you've enjoyed this look at customizing the ZBrush interface, creating custom button placements and custom marking menus. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching.